This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today we're going to look at cards with an Esper identity. Esper refers to one of the three-color factions that made its debut in 2009 Shards of Alara, where it was the name of the plane that focused on white, blue, and black. While there have been other factions over the years that occupy those same three colors, Esper is the name for this color combination that has stuck around for most players. This is actually the second time I've looked at Esper cards. The first time was back in 2020, but we've gotten a lot more cards with this three-color identity over the last few years, and the list has changed significantly. In fact, this list has changed more over the last 3 years in almost any video where I've revisited a topic. To have an Esper identity, a card has to have the blue, black, and white mana symbols all appear somewhere on the card with no other colored mana symbols. In all, there were 84 cards eligible for this list, and in it, we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, before we look at the top 10 proper, let's look at the 6 cards that made the 2020 list, but didn't make it this time. Starting with Resounding Wave, which was at number 10 last time. For 2 generic and a blue, it's an instant that returns a permanent to its owner's hand, and also has cycling for 5 generic and 1 of each Esper color, which means you can pay that cost and discard it to draw a card, and in this case, when you cycle it, you also get to return 2 permanents to their owner's hands. There's a whole cycle of cyclers, like this in Shards of Alara, and I really like the design on them since they're all decent spells with late game cycling upside. Resounding Wave's only point came in a Storm deck from Modern back in 2017. It took 5 points to crack the list this time, so it's never going to find its way back to the top 10. Next, there's Dromar the Banisher, which was at number 9 last time. For 3 generic, a white, a blue, and a black, Dromar is a 6/6 flyer, and when it hits the opponent, you can pay 2 generic and a blue, and choose a color, and return all creatures of that color to their owner's hands. Invasion Block focused on 3 color combinations, and each of these received a rare legendary dragon, like this one. This has nice stats and the ability to bounce a whole bunch of stuff in the right situation. One sort of frustrating thing is that the effect is symmetrical, and Dromar happens to be 3 colors, so naming white, blue, or black isn't really something you want to be doing in most situations. Still, the ability to bounce a bunch of green or red creatures, when it's stapled to a big flyer, is pretty nice. It was played in standard Esper control decks, but it doesn't have any points since 2001. Next, there's Sharuum the Hegemon, the leader of Esper. Despite her high status in the lore, though, she's no longer on the Esper top 10, after coming in at number 8 last time. For 3 generic, a white, a blue, and a black, Sharuum is a legendary 6/6 flying artifact creature, and when she enters the battlefield, she returns an artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield. It was played in standard artifact decks where she had lots of powerful options to reanimate, like Filigree Angel. Sharuum hasn't gained any points since 2010, though. Next, there's Dromar's Charm, which was at number 7 last time. Like all charms, this is a modal spell with 3 options. In this case, it costs 1 mana of each Esper color, and it's an instant, and your options are gain 5 life, counter target spell, or target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. As with most charms, any of these modes individually doesn't feel like an amazing deal for the cost of this spell. You'd probably expect to pay 1 mana to gain 5, 2 to counter a spell, and 1 to give something -2/-2 until end of turn. That's what's so interesting about charms though, because when you get to play a single card with all 3 as options, it doesn't really matter that it's overcosted. Dromar's Charm gained all of its points in standard control decks, and hasn't gained any points since 2001. Next, there's Stormscape Apprentice, which was at number 6 last time. Stormscape is the invasion block name for this color combination, so it's one of the names for this color combination that didn't manage to stick in the long run. Stormscape Apprentice is a 1/1 that costs 1 blue, and you can pay 1 white and tap it to tap a creature, or pay 1 black and tap it to have target player lose 1 life. Paying 1 white to tap a creature is actually a pretty solid rate, as it gives you a fairly cheap way to shut down your opponent's best creature, and if you're not interested in doing that, the Apprentice can pressure the opponent's life total. It hasn't gained any points since 2001. And the last card from the 2020 list that didn't make it this time is Trial and Error. It's a split card, which means you can choose to cast one side or the other. The Trial side is an instant that costs 1 white and a blue, and it returns all creatures blocking or blocked by target creature to their owner's hand. Error costs a blue and a black, and it counters a multicolored spell. While this doesn't look the same as Dromar's Charm, it's a modal spell in the same way, and that's a good thing, because each side of this card is individually very narrow. Not all opponents will have multicolored spells for you to counter, and blocks won't always set up in such a way for Trial to be worthwhile. But both of these are quite potent when things do line up correctly. It was played in Esper control decks and Ravnica block constructed, but it hasn't gained a single point over the last 5 years, and as a result it lost its spot on the list. Now that we've covered the cards from the 2020 list that didn't make it this time, let's move to the list proper, starting with our number 10 card, which is Zur, Eternal Schemer, a newcomer to the list that didn't even exist back in 2020. For one of each Esper color, he's a 1/4 with flying, and he gives all of your enchantment creatures Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. For one generic and a white, Zur can turn non-aura enchantments into creatures with base power and toughness, each equal to their mana value. Note, by the way, that effect is not temporary, and obviously every enchantment you animate will have those 3 awesome keyword abilities that Zur grants them. Zur gained all of his points in Pioneer Fires of Invention variants that also use Enigmatic Incarnation. One of the downsides of Fires of Invention is supposed to be that you can't do anything with your mana. But if you put a creature in your deck with an activated ability, you can find ways to use your mana, and Zur definitely fits the bill there. What's more is, Zur can be tutored up by Incarnation, and he can animate the deck's mini enchantments, including both Fires and Incarnation, and function as a very real win condition. That said, Zur hasn't gained any points in 2023, and right now it feels like if I revisit this list in a few years, he'll probably get bumped off it since he barely made it this time. At number 9, it's Chromium the Mutable, who was at number 4 last time. It has the same score as Zur, but it has higher average finishes within the top 8, so I gave it the higher spot. The original Chromium, from Legends, was one of the game's very first Esper cards, since Legends was the first set to feature multicolored cards. For 4 generic and 1 of each Esper color, Chromium is a 7/7 with flash and flying, and it can't be countered. You can also discard a card, making it so until end of turn, Chromium becomes an unblockable 1/1 human with hexproof. In short, Chromium is a huge, beefy flyer with flash. Flash not only allows you to put it into play to ambush much smaller attackers, it also means that if you're a control deck, you can leave your mana up and see if you need to counter or remove something instead, and if your opponent tries to play around that kind of thing, you punish them by casting a huge dragon. Chromium is very hard to interact with effectively, since it can't be countered, and you can give it hexproof at instant speed. This combination made Chromium an attractive win condition in Esper control decks while it was in Standard, and it has even made an appearance in Modern. Still, it hasn't gained any points since 2019, and like Zur, it may not be on this list for much longer. At number 8, it's Esper Charm, which is at number 3 last time. Like Dromar's Charm, this is an instant that costs 1 of each Esper color, and it gives you 3 choices. In this case, you can destroy an enchantment, or you can draw 2, or you can make your opponent discard 2. This is not the most efficient way to destroy an enchantment, but the other 2 modes on the card aren't all that overcosted, so playing Esper Charm often allows you to have enchantment hate in your deck in game 1, while having a card that is also otherwise serviceable. Over the years, Esper Charm has seen play in Standard and Modern control decks, and it's even gained a point within the last year, so it may not be entirely finished. At number 7, it's Nimble Larcenist, a newcomer to the list, and a card that didn't exist in 2020. The Larcenist is from Streets of New Capenna, our most recent set prominently featuring this 3-color combination. On that plane, the white, blue, and black faction is called Obscura. Anyway, the Larcenist costs 1 of each Esper color, and it's a 2/1 flyer that, when it enters the battlefield, lets you look at your opponent's hand and exile an artifact, instant, or sorcery from it. Note, by the way, that unlike most creatures that exile a card from an opposing player's hand, your opponent never gets the card back, so you get a clean 2-for-1 when you can hit a card with it. It has been played in Standard Esper mid-range decks, and it's also a sideboard card in Pioneer Enigmatic Incarnation decks that I mentioned earlier. While you can use Incarnation to search up Zur when you have a board state that can win you the game, tutoring up a singleton Larcenist is a great early play that can allow you to really disrupt your opponent's entire game plan. The Larcenist is well positioned to gain more points in Pioneer going forward, and Standard isn't out of the question either. At number 6, it's Tolu's Clever Conductor, our second consecutive Obscura card, which also means that it's a newcomer to the list. Tolu's is a 3/1 that costs a white-blue hybrid mana, a blue mana, and a blue-black hybrid mana. The use of these hybrid costs means a wider variety of decks can cast this than would normally be the case for a card with an Esper mana cost. You can potentially pay 3 blue for it, for example. Anyway, when Tolu's enters the battlefield, it connives. This is the Obscura mechanic, and it lets you draw a card and discard a card, and if you discard a non-land, you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature that connives, which in this case is Tolu's. Connive is a surprisingly powerful mechanic, as it gives you great card selection, loads your graveyard, and grows your creature. Anytime you discard a card with Toluz in play, including from Connive, you exile that card, and when Toluz dies, you put the exiled cards into their owner's hand. In other words, if your opponent finds a way to take down Toluz, you're going to get at least one card back, and if you can find a way to discard more cards, you can get many more than that. So far, Toluz has gained all of its points in standard Esper mid-range decks, which feature lots of other cards that let you discard. These decks also feature a prominent Legendary Matters theme, and Toluz can be particularly spicy alongside the channel lands like Otawara, because not only does it cost less to channel these lands, Toluz also exiles those lands when you channel them, putting your opponent in a pretty terrible spot, where they have to worry about your 4-2 attacking them, but if they ever kill it, you're going to reload your hand with very real cards. Toluz is going to keep racking up points in Standard going forward and has a good chance of moving up the list. At number 5, it's Obscura Interceptor, our third consecutive Obscura card, and another newcomer to the list. For one generic and one of each Esper color, it's a 3/1 with flash and lifelink, and when it enters the battlefield it connives and bounces a spell to its owner's hand. Interacting with spells on the stack isn't an effect we see all that often, but when we do, it tends to be pretty powerful. In this case, you add a very real body to the board while getting some card selection, and if the spell is expensive enough, sometimes it feels like you're casting Time Walk. The Interceptor is often played alongside Toluz in Esper Legends decks in Standard, but she's also played in Esper Control. Like Toluz, she's likely to keep gaining points as long as she's in Standard. At number 4, it's Thopter Foundry, which was at number 1 last time. After an extended visit to New Capenna, we finally returned to Alara. Thopter Foundry costs 1 white, black hybrid mana and 1 blue mana, and it's an artifact with an activated ability. You can pay 1 generic and sacrifice a non-token artifact to make a 1/1 blue Thopter with flying, and you gain 1 life. In a vacuum, that ability doesn't seem all that impressive. After all, you have to give up a non-token to get a token, and it's not like that token is that impactful, right? Well, it turns out Thopter Foundry is a key piece in a powerful combo. When combined with Sword of the Meek, you end up having the ability to make a 1/1 flyer and gain 1 life for every single mana you have. This is because you sacrifice a sword to the Foundry, then you get a 1/1, and then the sword comes back and attaches itself to the Thopter, and you can keep going from there. This combo was so good that the sword got banned out of Extended and preemptively banned in Modern, and it was also powerful enough to make some noise in Legacy. The sword did eventually get unbanned in Modern in 2016, allowing the Foundry combo to be reunited. So, the Foundry was already pretty great, but the printing of Urza Lord High Artificer and Goblin Engineer in Modern Horizons really led to a resurgence of the Thopter Sword combo. The Engineer lets you tutor up artifacts and put them in the graveyard, which is exactly where you want Sword of the Meek, and Urza makes it so every artifact you control can tap for blue, and that means that the Thopter Sword combo can go infinite, since each new Thopter can tap for blue to pay for the Foundry's ability. This powered up version of the combo is also good enough for Legacy. Thopter Foundry is going to keep gaining points going forward, but the 3 cards in front of it are too, so the number 4 spot on the list might be its ceiling. At number 3, it's Voidrend, another new Capenna card that didn't exist back in 2020. For one of each Esper color of mana, this is an uncounterable instant that can destroy a non-land permanent. That's some impressive flexibility, and the fact that even players packing counter magic can't do anything about it is pretty awesome. It's seen very heavy play in Standard, as it's worth playing in any deck that can cast it. It's also seen significant play in Historic, Alchemy, Pioneer, and even Legacy. The fact it already has multi-format success bodes well for its future, and it's a card with quite a lot of time left in Standard too, so it has a very good chance at eventually passing the number 2 card on the list, which is Sphinx of the Steel Wind, which was at number 3 last time. For 5 generic and 1 of each Esper color of mana, the Sphinx is a 6/6 artifact creature with a slew of awesome keyword abilities. It has flying, first strike, vigilance, and protection from red and green. All of that makes it incredibly formidable, because it can pressure the opponent while remaining on defense, and it's very difficult to block. The fact it has protection from red and green is no small thing either, because that means the Sphinx doesn't die to lots of commonly played artifact removal. The downside here is, of course, that the Sphinx costs a whopping 8 mana, but the decks that have played it over the years basically never pay that. Instead, they look to reanimate it or otherwise cheat it into play. That prohibitive mana cost kept it from seeing play in Blockers Standard, and it even only has a single point in Modern, but it's found a ton of success in the Eternal formats, where you have access to the most powerful ways to get around ever paying for the Sphinx. In Legacy, it's been played in decks that use Show and Tell, Goblin Welder, and Animate Dead. It sees the most play in Vintage, though, where it's fairly common for decks to run the singleton Tinker they are allowed alongside Sphinx of the Steel Wind. The Sphinx has been especially active over the last few years, where its protection from green became more valuable following the printing of Force of Vigor. The Sphinx is likely to keep gaining points going forward, but the cards in front of it and behind it will too. And at number 1, it's Rafine the Scheming Seer, a newcomer to the list and the leader of the Obscura in New Capenna. Rafine costs 1 of each Esper mana and gives you a 1/4 with flying and ward 1. Additionally, anytime you attack, you get to connive X, where X is the number of attacking creatures you control. This means Rafine can come down on turn 3, you can send in an attacker, and immediately get the value from connive. She's quickly gained a lot of points, especially in Standard, largely because she slots into so many different decks, whether they're straightforward Esper midrange or aggro decks, or decks focused on using tons of legendary creatures. In Pioneers, she's seen play in similar decks, as well as in Greasefang decks, which look to combo Greasefang with Parhelion too, and Rafine's Connive can help you set that up. Basically, what Rafine can do is inherently powerful, and she's cheap enough to slot into a wide variety of decks. She's going to keep seeing heavy play in Standard, while also gaining points in Pioneer, and that's probably going to be enough for her to solidify her spot at the top of this list. So, those are the top 10 cards with an Esper identity. Are you a fan of this color combination? If so, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at various color combinations, check out the description, or you'll see the playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.